Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
It is St. Patrick's Day, and so top of the morning to ya. As you all know, I love, I'm sorry, I'm getting over a cold. As you know, I love Northern Ireland and Ireland in general, so yeah, I love Ireland. I love the Irish every day. So yeah, I'm getting over a cold. And what else? I was going to tell you. Oh yeah, I took medicine last night to feel better, and now I'm just got a cloudy brain. Of sleep medication because of my cold. So stick with me on this one, okay? I'm excited though, because we took a little detour last week, but I was already thinking about this talk and already had been working on this talk. So I am, and I don't think it's going to be like mind-boggling revelation. And at the same time, I think it might need to be a mind-boggling revelation, or at least a wake-up call to the church as a whole, in a way. And I mean, that's the kind of the continued work here is, I really hope that one day people will look at revolution and at least if how they remember it is be someone as like how we started out as kind of a ministry for people falling through the cracks and felt like they didn't belong. And then, hello, happy St. Patrick's Day. That they'll realize that we tried to bring a bunch of outcasts together, and we did, and then we grew into a community that brought people of diversity together, of just not of, but of also diversity of thought. And we help make the church a better place, but also the world a better place by speaking about grace and peace and helping people learn to live life and let people live life on life's terms. And so that's kind of today is what we're talking about in Galatians. It's going to be really interesting. Oh, my shirt today is my kiddos helped me make this shirt. It's my friend Fred Knowlton, who's also a Revolution person, who's been coming to Revolution for a long time, sent me some clothes markers because he knows I like to do punk rock fun stuff with markers on clothes. And so my kids helped me make this really fun shirt, and Fred provided the pins. So thank you. Yeah, I thought it was fun. It was kind of inspired by a shirt I saw Billy Idol wearing in like the 70s, like an old picture of Billy Idol. And so me and my kids. My daughter had a music recital yesterday, and so I wasn't feeling very well, but I drove downtown to go see it anyhow, and it was all the music was really great, but my daughter with her little music group, I mean her choir kind of got up and sang, and that I didn't realize the second song was going to be Lean on Me. And I don't know if you guys know this, but my mom and my sister recorded that song Lean on Me and put it out on one of my mom's albums. And I don't know, it was just like the combination of that and then my little girl up there singing her heart out to that song, and just that song alone. I mean, I was just, tears were rolling down Dad's cheeks. I was very proud of my daughter, and it was just kind of one of those moments, where everything comes around. So, man, I'm excited about the work Revolution's doing. I'm inspired to be peacemakers, to take this message of grace to so many different people, and not just for the sake of Christianity. I think sometimes we have to put that aside, but to help people just live life and help this world and this country become a better place. And so those are some of the I don't want to say these are new goals. I feel like these are just the goal is getting clearer as we get closer to what the goal is, if that makes sense. All right, well, stick with me. If my voice gives out, I'll do something else. But don't worry, you won't get sick through the podcast, I don't think. Hopefully not. All right, well, we finally made it to Galatians 4. Folks, this is the longest we've ever gone through Galatians. It's pretty crazy, and I'm excited about it. So this is what I have to do if I have too much medication for the sleep, and the night before I have to go get a McDonald's iced coffee, because that's the only coffee that knocks me I'm back. So we finally made it to Galatians 4. Can you believe it? And man, the work, the scholarship that I've read on Galatians 4 is amazing. But it's really funny because they go really deep into this stuff. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute, but I'll also tell you a little bit why we're not going to necessarily talk about it. Let's start here. In Galatians 4:1, if you're following along, my point is this: heirs, as long as they are minors, are no better than slaves, though they are their owner of all their property. But they remain under guardians and trustees until the date is set by the father. So with us, while we were minors, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption. Now listen to that. So we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children of God, has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child, and if a child, then also an heir through God. So what's really interesting about this is one thing here is this adoption metaphor that it'll keep on going with that. In 8, it says, I formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved of beings that by nature are not God's. And he's talking about other religions and things like that. Let's get back to 4:1 through 7, though. So you're no longer a slave to the slave child, but child into the heir of throne. So you've been adopted into Christ. And so I was reading this. I'm doing this, doing the study for this, all this scholarship behind adoption, behind Greek adoption and Roman adoption, and Jewish adoption, and, going through all the ins and outs and what's the little differences and the subtle nuances of these things. and it's a lot. I'm underlining, okay, how will this work into the talk? How will this happen? And NRSV is the translation I use. And so, sorry, everybody. I'm probably too sick to be giving a talk today. So I'll try to keep this short. but the scholar, one of the scholars I'm reading, he gets to it and he's like, but the fact is Paul probably didn't even know the nuances between Greek and Jewish adoption, and it probably wasn't even relevant to what he was trying to say here. He probably wasn't trying to dive that deep. Now I'm telling you, when you've just read like 15 pages on like the differences between these two, and and just learning what they were like, differences between what we understand as adoption and what they understood as adoption, and even like interfamily adoption, all this stuff. And then the scholar goes, but yeah, I've just told you all this, but it probably really wasn't on Paul's radar at the time. So I was like, awesome, thanks. But I know a little more. So if that ever comes up in conversation, as it often does, I'll be able to seem really smart. But what's really beautiful here is under the law, and this is one of the things I read in 5. It says, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive the adoption as children. God redeemed the Gentile believers from the law that excluded Gentiles from his people. So the law often excluded the Gentiles from being God's people. So that's what's really kind of beautiful about this 5, is that it's not just being like, the law's done. But that we're adopted in, that like this is the good news. The good news is, the good news is that the good news is for everybody. And that's pretty exciting. Oh, as my son always reminds me, if you like what you're hearing, please don't forget to like what we're doing and follow us here on YouTube. My son always gives me a hard time about not saying that stuff. So like and subscribe. My daughter gave this to me for my birthday. Isn't that nice? So I like this adoption idea. I like this. It says God redeemed the Gentile believers. I'm reading something over here from the law that excluded the Gentiles from his people. So now they can be adopted like Israel as his children. And so everyone's included. And I think that's something really important that we have to remember in this, because when last few weeks we brought in some of John Hume and the great civil rights leader and peacemaker in Ireland, and talking about how he's like, we had to put religion aside, and we had to realize what government was really for, and that's just for helping people live better lives, but that's all people, and finding diversity through unity. Unity through diversity, and this issue is that everybody's included, no one's excluded, and by doing that, we have to make allowances for differences in people's lives. And what we're dealing with here in Galatians is that we have Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians who are basically fighting with each other, and then you've got people trying to discount the Apostle Paul at the same time. So you've got this really interesting, small, complex letter where everybody is fighting, and Paul is trying to remind everybody, you are one. You are humans. There's no male or female, no Jew nor Gentile, slave or free. I think if he was to write this letter today, he might even say Christian or atheist, because he's trying to bring this community together and say, we are one in this community. We are one. We have to be. That's how communities have to work. That's how people have to live. If you're to love your neighbor and to love your enemy and to love this, it's called to love everyone. And that's where we've really missed out in the church, is instead of loving everyone and including people where they're at, we've found new ways to exclude them. And it's unfortunate. Teresa, how is my father? Sometimes it's really hard to contact with my in-laws because they've got other things going on, I guess. But Last I heard, he's trying to get better, but he's had a lot of small strokes. So I just honestly wish I had a better update for you right now. I just don't know how he is. But please pray for him. If you pray, or you can send good vibes or whatever the kids are doing nowadays. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to beings that by nature are not gods. And he's talking about false gods, and that's another thing. And I don't think it's really need to go through it in scholarship, all the different gods that people worshipped, but they, you know, most people, when they saw idols, they didn't think that the idols were literally like, oh, God looks like a bird, or God looks like, they just knew that those were kind of representations, and they just kind of helped them focus, But a lot of the gods were seen as elements, like the god of water, the god of fire, and so he would say that, being to those elements, he goes, you are being by nature are not gods. But now that you've come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn your back again to the weak and beggarly elemental spirits? How can you want to be enslaved to them again? And I would say the law as well, enslaved to them again. You are observing special days, that's law, and other religions, and months, and seasons, and years. I am afraid that my work for you may have been wasted. And so you see the discouragement within Paul. Like Paul wasn't like, I am a victorious, that's just in the name of Jesus, we've got it together. He's saying, like, you continue to fall back into your old ways. And it's not a thing that just you Jewish Christians, which you could almost at the time look at the conservatives, and then and we call them, pretend that they're liberals. Like, you guys all have different things. You all have your own purity codes, and it's true. Like, you look at the right and they have a way of thinking. You look at the left and they have a way of thinking, and they all have rules and regulations, and you have to add up and fit in. And I've realized that I don't think I'm either of those anymore, and I'm not some middle guy either. I just don't feel like I have a place in those areas. And I've discovered that through philosophy and through reading Paul and understanding these things. But we all have these rules, and we kind of go back to these useless powers of virtue signaling and our own purity thing of you get Christian. Well, I have my purity ring, and I don't have sex, and I don't drink, and I don't screw, and I don't go with girls that do, and then you have people on the left who are like, I don't judge anybody, and I use all the proper words, and then if you don't, you're out. You know what I mean? It's like, wait, I have, 4 people I date, and if you don't agree with that, then you need to get the hell out of here. And here's the problem is like, I'm not going to pass judgment on either one of those people. I mean, I have in the past, but what I'm trying to do now is say, how do we live and let live so we can have a better life for everybody, and not just for us, but when we're able to help folks like this, and we're able to disagree well, and we're able to live and let live in some ways, that helps the poor. And how does that help the poor, Jay? Is because we're not fighting over identity politics. We're not fighting over these things in each other's lives. We're saying, hey, they have the right to eat and be fed and everybody like everybody else. And what you see is often our fighting with these ideas is keeping us from ignoring the less than, those who are really suffering, those the poor and the homeless and the drug addicts and all these people who are suffering. Because we're fighting over these things that affect our lives. And we don't even realize, like, it's funny because people say, what is it? You've got, you don't recognize your, oh gosh, sorry, guys. Too much NyQuil. You don't recognize your privileges. But often some of those people don't recognize, like, some of these things that they're arguing about are privileges to be arguing about in other countries, in other places. You'd be killed for certain of these things or things like that. And we're fighting each other tooth and nail and forgetting about some of the less. We're forgetting about the prisoners. We're forgetting about the homeless. We're forgetting about the people who suffer from mental health and things like that. So interesting. And so we have to remember that's when we become enslaved to our ideals and enslaved to kind of this virtue signaling or this purity way that of our own tribe shows, we forget about grace. We forget that we've all been adopted into this. And so that's really interesting. Hi, Nathan. I'm actually we're just giving a talk right now. I'd be glad to answer some of your questions later, or you can follow me on Instagram if you're wondering more questions. But right now, just trying to get through this talk. I have a cold, so I'm not really answering a lot of questions today. So Paul says, I'm afraid that my work for you may have been wasted. And so you have this as well, as you have the Apostle Paul saying, is this whole message of grace, is this whole message of inclusion, is the whole message of Christ's inclusion, is that been wasted on you because you continue to go back and practice these things? And I think it's important to see. I'm going to go on to this a little bit more because I think it's very telling. Friends, I beg you to become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You have done me no wrong. You know that it was because of a physical infirmity that I first announced the gospel to you. Though my condition put you to the test, you did not scorn or despise me, but you welcomed me. And as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus, what has become of the goodwill you felt? For I testify, if it had been possible, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me. And so this, guys, you get a lot of speculation of what was wrong with Paul's eyes and things like that. They make much of you, but for no good purpose. Oh, have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? And he goes, they make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to exclude you so that you may make much of them. It is good to be made much of for good purposes at all times, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, from whom I'm again in the pain of childbirth until Christ is formed in you, I wish you were present with you now, and I could change your tone, for I am perplexed about you. Look at this part where it goes, they make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to exclude you so that you may make much of them. And I think that's something that we fall for in a very big capitalist society. I think that's something we fall for often in Christianity as well. As, when these people have all these rules and regulation and who's in and who's out, you start to feel special because you're included, because you're not out. And even when you're out, you're looking at their power and going, oh my gosh, they have so much power. So why do we get so scared of some of us look at Donald Trump and go like, oh, I'm terrified, and we give him power because we're afraid the power he has is exclusion, exclude people we love, exclude people like this. Or we look at Trump and go like, oh, he can exclude other people, or there could be more wars or things like this. And so we're torn between the power that these people have to exclude. And the only way that the reason they exclude, the reason they are legalistic is to have a sense of power. For example, someone like Mark Driscoll, a lot of what his message is in that like very neo-Calvinist message, that I don't subscribe to has a lot to do with exclusion. Even growing up, the Assemblies of God, you could lose your salvation really. So you had this fear of constantly like, oh, could I lose my salvation? Is God not going to love me? And for me, this concept of hell, that I was going to be tortured forever or things like this growing up, this power of exclusion is what gave the power. Is this power of I'm not enough and I can't be included. And then what happens is you discover grace and you realize everybody's included. And that's what Paul's talking about here, is you're all included. And that's what blows your mind. It goes, there's no male, no female, no Jew, no Gentile, no slave, no free, for you're all one in Christ. All fall short. This concept of power that excludes is insane. And we've really bought into it. And we don't realize is that it's not about us. That's usually when people are like that, it's more about them. It's about their egos. And it's about capitalism. It's about paying the bills and having more and more and more and bringing in more people because that's what works. They find a system that works, something that happens, and people respond to it. And unfortunately, more people respond to excluding others than including others. And that's the sad thing about politics today. Like if a good conservative came along who said, I'm going to govern everybody and I want everybody to have the same rights, or if a Democrat said, I would feel much more comfortable rather than this exclusion of saying those people and them and us and them and they, and look at what they're doing and that, and so we just get so focused on the us and thems that we forget about humanity. We forget about that, everybody poops. I have to go back to one of my kids' books. Everybody poops. That humanity, even though that might be gross and disgusting, but that's who we are. Sorry. I'm losing my voice. And I want you to look, tell me, Paul says in Galatians 21, tell me, you who desire to be subject to the law, will you not listen to the law? For it is written, Abraham had two sons, one slave and one woman, and the other a free woman. I want to talk about being slaves to the law for a minute. And kind of like this idea of being under protective custody that Paul talks about. He goes, before we were adopted in, what does he say? And I'm going to go back up to 4, 1 through something. Elemental spirits. You were born under law in order to redeem those who may under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. Now, this point, my point at 1, it says 4:1 says, my point is this: heirs, as long as they are minors, are no better than slaves, though they are owner of all the property, but they're still no better than slaves because they're owner of all the property. But they remain under guardians. Now listen to this. They remain under guardians and trustees until the date is set by the father. Now, the date that's set by the father, when one becomes independent, when one receives all that they were meant to receive, and Paul's argument here is grace. It is Jesus. That's what he's talking about. He's saying, you were, not you are, you were. And listen to this, but they remain under guardians and trustees until the date is set by the Father. And now this is where I want to really question the church and question Christianity as a whole, is this concept that we were under the Father's, we were under protective custody. We were under, we were minors. We had our guardians. And now under Christ, we're no longer under these guardians. But for me, I see Christianity often, and pastors and denominations often, as sin managers. It's like the church becomes so involved in our lives that it's like they're out there making sure that we don't do bad things, that we leave the lifestyle, like we're not involved in the old lifestyles. When I was a teenager, it was like, you're not going to the dance clubs, are you? You're not hanging out with people who drink and smoke, are you? You're not going to these things, are you? And it continues on, like when you get older, you're not having an affair, are you? You're not being lust. And so what happens is in Christianity often, and Christianity's allowed itself to become this, is that it's they're guardians. And so what I want to argue here is that we are still under the law. That Christianity has created Not, it has created another good news. And it's another good news that includes the law. It's another law that pretends to be the law. It's not the law at all, but they become the law. It's like there's a new sheriff in town. And the new sheriff is not just legalism, but it's this need to control and this need to be there. But I think this need to control is the concept of, well, I just don't feel like feeding the homeless and telling people that Jesus loves them is enough. So what we want to do is we want to bring in people and we're going to control every aspect of their life. So we're not going to just have a weekly talk because that's not enough. We're going to have a Sunday night talk and then we're going to have a Wednesday night talk. And I think a lot of times it comes out of a good heart, but then we're going to have all these other things that we're going to be doing. And we're going to get everybody involved in the church and then we're going to make small groups and we're going to have them doing churches in their houses and things like that. Now, I'm not saying these things are bad, but what I'm saying is when they become ways of looking into people's lives and keeping a watch on people's lives, we've got a problem. I would remember this old Jerry Lewis movie. You know, Jerry Lewis, he used to have he's an old comedian. And Jerry Lewis, I think the Europeans or the French loved him, slapstick comedian. And he had this movie, and I think it was one of his last biggest movies, and it was like in 1983. And the title is escaping me right now. But he plays this guy who can't do anything right, just fails. He wants to kill himself, fails at it. But he joins this group to quit smoking. And they're guaranteed to quit smoking. I put up a clip of the sign that he sees when he goes into this he wants to quit smoking, this non-smoking group. I put up the picture of the sign on the Instagram account so you can see it. And so he wants to quit smoking. So in the movie, it's this continuous gag of like every time he's just he goes to smoke a cigarette, somebody, big guy shows up, an old football player shows up. I think it's Dick Butkus or something. It shows up and he's just like, and he gets punched every time he tries to smoke a cigarette. And so now he's like terrified and he's like trying to always hide and you can't hide. Every time somehow he lights a cigarette, the big guy finds him and punches him out. And he's like, and that's how he's going to make him quit smoking. And often I find in the church, that's what happens with them they become so obsessed with sin management. And every denomination has a different concept of what sin is and what sin isn't, which shows you that it's not this black and white thing. But it's like, I feel like they're there to like either kick you in the teeth, put you in something, shame you, or confront you, or tell you can't be on staff, or tell you, whatever, put you in a certain program. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, I mean, people could sign up and have their children like literally kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken to these programs to try to straighten them out. I mean, it's horrific, the control that the church felt they needed. And that what it does is it keeps the church as this like lawmaker. We're law keepers. We keep the law. We keep the law of Christianity. So, don't be lusting, and I'm going to overlook your pornography intake. I'm going to overlook if you're drinking too much. I'm going to make sure your marriage is right. I'm going to do this. And it's just accountability. And it's just because I love you. And matter of fact, if you do any of these things, you can't come back or you can't be a member or you can't do this or you can't do that. And so now there's not a room for a lot of broken people. And there's not a lot of room for people who are just living life on life's terms. I've been divorced twice, so I probably shouldn't be here ministering to you, right? That's this concept of this constantly watching us. And I just thought that movie made this great point, this Jerry Lewis film of like what the church has become is just like the overwatchers, the overlookers, but even now, like and I can't just say like these are conservative. I grew up conservative, so that's a lot what the church was like for me as a kid. I mean, I remember being a kid, going to church camp, having my religious experience at church camp. And, it was during the summer. So during the summer, I was like, okay, got back from church camp, wasn't drinking, wasn't doing anything bad because I thought it was all about works and bad works management. So I was keeping my life together, not drinking all this stuff. And then school starts and then the parties start. And the next thing you know, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just have a wine cooler. And I remember literally going to this party and I was like, all right, I'll just have a wine cooler. And because, I don't know, Jesus turned water into wine. I have no idea. Thank you, Bartles and James. And I'm sipping this wine cooler, and I'm not lying to you. And these kids were probably coming to the same party, is the ironic part. These kids from my youth group drive up in the car, and I'm like, whoop, and I'm like, oh, hey guys. And I hear the girl in the back like, I told you he wouldn't last very long. And I remember thinking like, she was right. I can't add up. I can't do what these people want. Like I had to sneak cigarettes behind the youth group and things like that. And it was just constantly like, nope, you don't add up. You don't belong here. And this was a Baptist church at the time. And these guys believed in eternal, once saved, always saved. And here I was somehow still losing my salvation, even with the Baptists, because I was drinking a Bartles and James, and that just continues to happen at a bigger point. I mean, I watched when my parents fell. I didn't just watch the conservative Christians scapegoat my parents. I watched the left scapegoat my parents too, because they're like, look at those people. They're so bizarre. They're so weird. And Tammy with all the makeup and all the crazy worship. And who needs a water slide? But even the conservatives were like, yeah, water slide. It's like it brought them together like scapegoating, and judgment brought the right and the left mainline denominations and, these evangelical, and brought them together through judgment. It's like really unifies the church. And I watch a lot of this stuff like online now, which is really fascinating because before you didn't have all of this, you couldn't see all these people and what they were thinking all the time, and now you can see it. And now I watch these progressive Christians just, oh, these guys are bastards. Oh, I mean, I saw something the other day talking about Calvinists being spineless and horrible and white and all this stuff, and I'm going like, wow, talk about a general judgment. And just like, well, this is my mind was boggled by like the like, hey, we're gonna watch. You're too legalistic, so we're gonna get you. You're not legalistic enough, so we're gonna get you. And the fact is we have become slaves to the law again. And I'm just saying, my heart's broken. Are you guys gonna continue to follow these elementary spirits? Are you gonna continue to walk down these paths? And are we gonna continue to be so petty that my hope was, and I thought in the 90s and early 2000s, that the progressive church was going to be the group that got us away from that, and that they would know more for what they're for than what they're against. But now to me, it's still just all Christians. I seem to know more about what they don't like than what they do like. I know more of who's excluded by that side than who's included in that side, and it's like, oh yeah, we love the homeless and the prisoners. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we all do that. But these people, and so, judgment is bringing the Christians together, and it's sad, scapegoating. That's the one thing that people in the church have somehow mistakenly grasped religion. So people say, well, Jay, why are you Paulinian? I mean, what about red letter Christians and things like that? And I think the red letters are fantastic. But I think without the Apostle Paul, we miss what's happening in the early church, and we also miss grace. And Paul is telling us about like, what has Christ really done? Not just Christ lived, but what's Christ's death and resurrection? What does that mean to us? And he's saying that means that there's no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. This is what brings us together, is that we're human, that all humanity is precious. And instead we create these elementary spirits. Rather, now the elementary spirits seem like politicians, or what we think is, our, whatever our, and it just seems like, like we're being tossed by the wind sometimes, of whatever our convictions is. And then we got to legislate our convictions, and we got to fight over our convictions and destroy each other over our convictions, rather than learning to allow people to live, and maybe realizing the only way we really do change our convictions is through relationships. That's why Dr. King said the only thing capable of turning an enemy into a friend is love. And so I think this is a huge thing. I mean, like, here we are, I've got 11 people listening right now, and, it's like, we've got to stop scapegoating each other. We've got to stop destroying each other. We've got to stop coming together over, like, being judgmental. We've got to stop being known for what we're against. Like, that's just not it. Maybe the church doesn't need 5 services a week. Maybe the church doesn't need to be involved in your life as much as it's become, because these are people. This isn't the gospel. It isn't Christianity. It isn't philosophy. It's just, I mean, I have been in the 12-step program for how old am I now? For almost 27 years. And I don't feel like even with the sponsor, I'd had much as judgment or as much people diving into my life and watching what I do and don't do as I did in the church, even if I gave them permission or not. I remember going to one of the biggest churches in California. I was there to meet with some of the pastors about gay rights and inclusion. And at the time I was a smoker, and I was like, hey, I'd like to have a cigarette. Where can I smoke here? And they go, you can't smoke on campus. You got to go off campus. I mean, I had to walk like half a mile because it was a big campus to go have a cigarette, And that's the funny thing is like, it's just, we don't allow people who have addictions to come that close to us. You see what I'm saying? And this was a church that had 5 different services happening at once. You could go to 5 different worships. You literally could. 5 different worship service, whatever you like. I like hippie worship. I like hip hop worship. I like, and then the pastor shows up on a video screen, or I think they even had one where he was like a hologram. I was like, this is amazing. I was sitting in a place where they were serving donuts. They had a little cafe with donuts and stuff. And I was like, well, this is fantastic. I would probably go here, even if I didn't agree with their theology. Freaking donuts and coffee. This is fantastic. But just don't smoke. There's certain things we'll let you do, but it's what kind of worship you like. If you're kind of a person who's living life on life's terms or having a rough time, we prefer that you go off, and not talk about that, because what we want to do is we want to make you acceptable. And the thing is that when we go through the Tillich talk in the next few months, when we go through Tillich's You Are Accepted, what you'll realize is that there's none of that has anything to do with grace or accepted or being loved. The fact, I think, therefore I am, well, therefore you are, you think, therefore you are, therefore you have grace. And that should how it's be. You are because, therefore you have grace because you are, because you exist, because you are a human, because you have life. And we've missed that. And I know that this all seems like, that would be a great kumbaya hippie world, Jay, that you're talking about. And it sounds like some weird Unitarian universalism type of thing. And it's way beyond that. It's at the point where I feel like this is where we come together and we have the tough conversations, where we love our enemies, where we love people when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, and then makes it clear that our neighbor is also our enemies and those that we disagree with and those who persecute us. The message is love everyone. And what happens is we get this false sense of love. Well, if I really love them, then I must have to be their parent. But the thing is when you're an adult and when you're grown and when you have your own parents, that's not their place. So we've created this new law that says, you're only included in our community if you do A, B, C, or D, and we hand out judgment like a cup of water. It's like, it's just easy for us to give in our opinions. And we are under the law. And I would say the majority of church has been under the law probably for the past 1,500 years. And we have just missed it. We have missed it big time. And I do believe that if we took the steps to think this way, it's like grace. It's like as soon as things all of a sudden, like all is permissible, not all is beneficial. It's true. Like for me, grace was that moment when I was like, I can become sober because it has nothing to do with my relationship with God. It has nothing to do with my relationship with religion anymore. Now it's not beneficial for me. And that's something that grace gives us, is this idea of realizing, this is hurting me. That's what we're meant to see. Not that, I'm offending other people, or, I'm doing something that they don't like, so I should stop, How many people probably in addiction have had their bottoms put off because they kept getting sober for Christians? I'm sober. I remember I started Revolution and got sober just out of the fact that I was doing a church and doing all this stuff, but I started feeling guilty. And then every now and then I would go on a trip go home and see my old friends and have a few drinks, and they're like, oh, and then come back and feel really guilty and repent and do all this stuff. And I felt like I just couldn't get it right. And it wasn't until a friend of mine had me read the book of Galatians and told me that I was accepted, that I was able to walk into a 12-step program and be like, yeah, my life is unmanageable, man. I'm tired, sick and tired of being tired, but I know I'm covered by grace. So now I'm free to be alive. I'm free to do things that are, look at things in my life that aren't beneficial and follow those things rather than having someone else kind of oversee me and watch me and keep me under protective custody and be my guardian. And the problem is we've allowed churches to become guardians and judges, and that's not what we're called to be. We're called to be a hospital. We're called to let people know, hey, you're alive and you're loved. And I'm not saying this is if you see someone who's struggling with drug addiction and things like that, you don't say anything. I've had friends who've died from drug addictions, many friends in the church who've died from drug addictions. But I've also had friends who I've helped get into 12-step programs and doing things like that by talking to them and say, hey, I'm worried about you. I love you. I don't want to, it has nothing to do with how God feels about you. I just want you to live. Trying to give them that same freedom that I found, and that I have, And it's funny because when Paul talks about weaker Christians, he's, people who aren't as mature in Christ, he's talking about people who still practice certain holidays, have certain things, have these, he's like, they're still weak, so they don't eat meat to idols because they still think that has an influence on how God feels about it. They haven't accepted yet that they are accepted. They have not accepted that all is permissible, but not all is beneficial. And, and you need to make room for our weaker brothers and sisters. Don't let your liberties cause them to stumble, because what they think is going on in their lives. But what we have to do is allow them to know that they're accepted, not because they do certain things, not because they come to certain services, not because they joined a church, not because they believe something more or something less, but just letting people know you are included. So what I'm trying to say is when these things happen, this organic idea of what grace does and allows us to be free and then realize what's not beneficial in our life, what I'm saying is when we're allowed to others live their lives and not feel like we have to be the law in their life or the guardians in their life, hopefully, and I believe, that this will allow us to work better towards a better future for all people. And we won't be going like, oh, I need to legislate my convictions because no one's listening, so we'll make this a law and then they'll really have to, or we'll undo this law because then they'll really listen. No, that just continues more fighting and more arguing and all this. What has to be is like, hey, if that's how you want to live, let me tell you, can we discuss it? And I'll tell you why I think it might hurt you or hurt others. And you can do the same to me. And we can grow together as humans and as community. And you know what? We can also just not agree on everything because that's life. That's being an adult. That's really, okay, there's going to be conservatives who don't like this stuff. Hey, as long as you're not legislating and hurting people through legislation, then I'm going to have to let you live because I live in a country that's, we have freedom of speech. We have all those things. And so we have to let everybody be free. I have to let my LGBTQ brothers and sisters be free, and I have to let my neo-Calvinist brothers and sisters be free. And hopefully by that, we have a better world where we respect each other's freedoms and we somehow find unity through diversity. And you might, think I'm going to hell, and that's your prerogative. But the fact is, for us, is we're going to let people know that you are accepted no matter what. And that's our role, by helping people find themselves accepted and live the life that they were meant to live. And I think that's a lot of what Paul's talking about. Maybe I took it a little bit further, I don't know. But to me, that's good news, because we've got to stop being, we're not the guardians of the galaxy or like Team America. Remember that movie, Team America, where it's like America is like the world police, And we often seem like that, but it's like Christians have become the world police or, the fun police or whatever, And then we create other things. I just saw this thing about in Europe where they're like somewhere in Europe where the church is starting to do dances and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, that's great for you guys. But we tried making Christianity cool in the 90s. And what I realized is that you can do all that stuff, but without grace, it just doesn't really make a difference. I can have a cool church and we can be hip and I can get tattoos. Hey, I got tattoos, But some of the most legalistic, judgmental people I've ever met in Christianity have tattoos and are cool, and seem cool until they start to, tell you that you have no place here or that, your friends or people can't work at churches and things like that. Yes, what 81MF just said. I concur. And I'll read that for you who are listening online. We're on YouTube, but for those who are just listening to the podcast, 81MF says, when we stop trying to have the role of God with our neighbors and trust God to have his role, this is when they can actually grow. Yes. Yeah. And that's a quote from 81MF here on YouTube. And that's what's being said here. And so anyway, something to think about. If there's going to be another reformation, I think it has to be a reformation of grace and unity through diversity, and that, we are going to have to practice the tolerance that we've preached so often, or the tolerance that we've asked for so often. We might have to start practicing that tolerance as well, to live in a place where transformative conversation and just living is possible. So I think we've got to get rid of I don't need control. I don't have to fight. I've got to love people. And we can still fight for justice and equality. But when that's the basis of all of us surviving, is that somehow, we look at the government, go on the government's role is make sure we have good highways, that kids are taken care of, that there's child care, that we are able to get paid a livable wage, that taxes aren't too much, and blah, 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 and that we can all have good jobs, and our rent's not too high, and that we can go to the doctor. The rest should be like us having conversations, because I want Mark Driscoll to have all that just as much as I want my friend RuPaul to have all that. It's the fact is I want both folks to be able to live well and be able to take care of their children, and have health care, and to go to school and have a good education. My job is, I feel like this church's job and what we're called to do is to come in, and when we see hard issues and people being divided, that we come in and help people not be so divided, and that we become peacemakers. I believe this strongly. I don't believe things are going to get better. I wish they were, but I feel like with the political spectrum it is today, and I think that why this type of message, this Paulinian message, this really what I think is the basics of Christianity, is needed, not to save the world from hell, but to save the world from each other. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So that's my reading. I don't even think I finished Galatians. No, I didn't. So we'll finish the rest of 4 next week. But that's the message today. I hope you guys got something out of it. I'm a little sick, a little caffeinated, and a little head in the clouds because of the NyQuil. But here's another thing. It wasn't even NyQuil, because I don't even take NyQuil because I'm not supposed to, because of the alcohol in it. But it was just some generic thing that was like sick sleep. But here's the thing. I wanted to tell you guys about. All right. So this work to continue, we need your support. And that's just flat out right. And we're going to continue to move forward. But we do need your work. And it's not just to pay bills. Because we're just barely paying like the money that I make for doing this work. I've been doing this for 30 years. So yeah, I pull in a paycheck. And then the people who do handle our finances, they have to be paid. All the internet's online stuff has to be taken care of. But it's not just those things. There's other things like, right now we need a little printer. I found like a small printer online that does labels. I would like to get this printer for labels because I have dyslexia and it's really hard for me to write out every single address. I want to start writing thank you letters personally again, but I have to contact you guys because everybody gives online now, so it's completely different. I have to contact you and ask you for your address and do all this stuff. And for my dyslexia, it's really tough. So I wanted to get this little printer so I could print out labels once I do have your addresses and write my little thank you letters that I like to do. I haven't done in a long time. But right now we can't afford to do that. I'm wanting to start a book study on John Hume. And I might do that in a way that we haven't done before. I was thinking about maybe doing it on Instagram, doing an Instagram live or something like that. Want to start a book study on John Hume. I've read his book, but there's another book that I really wanted to read about him as more research for the study. And right now, I can't afford to get it because I have to pay bills and take care of my kids. And it's honestly, we don't have a budget where I can even buy books to study. And when I'm reading a lot of these books, the books are provided, you guys make donations, you guys make this church possible. And the church lets me buy books, on research and on biblical scholarship and things like that. Like books like these that aren't always cheap. And to be able to do these studies and be able to do the work and be able to bring you these talks every week. But we can't even afford to get some of that stuff right now. And it's been a long time since we were that way. But we really do need your support. Other ways you can support when you don't have financial help is by sharing. I may need to do a little video on how to share talks online, how to put them in your stories, because that helps a lot too. But nobody seems to. There's like 3 or 4 people who share these regularly. But by sharing these messages with people on Instagram and on YouTube, that helps a lot too. Liking these talks and subscribing here on YouTube helps us a lot. Giving us good reviews on whatever online group that you listen to. All these things up. Have you thought about opening up an Amazon wish list? Folks might be able to purchase these items outright for you. Now that's a great idea, and I think I will try that. We'll maybe put together a Revolution Amazon wish list. Not that Amazon is the greatest, but yeah, we can do that. At least letting people know, like, oh, this person got it, so we don't end up with 5 books on John Hume. Or 5 tiny printers. I've got 5 tiny printers. What will I do? That would be great. So these are other ways you can help do what we do. And if you do give financially, it does go to help pay me. And I'll tell you what I do with the pay is I pay my rent, I pay my bills, I buy groceries for my children. And that's about it right now. I've just signed up for a new thing, helping me find a part-time job. But I've been doing this for 30 years. I'd like to just continue doing this work as much as possible and focusing on this as possible so we can grow rather than stay stagnant. If we had more finances, I would have put up a clip of the movie I was talking about for you guys to check out. You can go on, I think you can see it online somewhere, but that movie I was talking about. But now I can't even remember the title because my head's in the clouds. So I do not have a TikTok account, but we have Instagram, and Revolution is on X, and I'm on Facebook. Revolution is on Facebook. We might do a TikTok account if TikTok is around, because of course our politicians are focusing on the things that matter, like TikTok. I mean, gosh, you guys, this is part of the reason why we do our work. We should be focusing on not killing other people or sending money to kill other people rather than social media. All right, well, I'm going to do that. Lorraine, I'm going to do that. Are you friends with me on Instagram? Remind me. I will try to do that. I have a Amazon, not an account, but I have an Amazon thing and a wish list for me personally, but I could probably do one called Revolution Wish List and just put that out there. So that's what I'll do. I'll put out a needs list. I think that's a great idea. So there you go, folks. That's what we're doing. And I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this year coming up. We've got so much good stuff. We got the Tillich thing coming up. We got a Martin Luther King. We always try to pick one of his talks and go over that once a year. We're going to do that. We're going to go over the Tillich's You Are Accepted Again. We'll promote we already have a recording up on on all of our stuff from Pete Rollins reading You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich. So that'll be great for us to do. And so I think this is going to be good stuff. Thank you all for being a part of this community. And this is great. It's like we had a little mini Revolution meeting afterwards about, hey, what can we do to make things better and a little bit easier? And look, we're doing it together. This is what community is about. And honestly, I used to get really insecure about having Revolution just online and not having a place around town, like, a pub or a place like this. But I think this might be less might be more right now for the church. I don't know if I need anybody to show up to a place, It might be nice in the future, but right now I think we're where we're supposed to be, and encouraging others to live their life and their best life, and to accept that they're accepted, and help others to do the same, and love our neighbors and our enemies. I mean, I really think that that's what we're, let's keep it basics. You know, capitalism, the capitalistic model tells me, oh, you got to do more, or like I have a lot of people tell me I need to do patron, you know. But the patron is like, oh, if you give this much, you get a special talk with me. It's like, I mean, that's not bad, but I prefer just to be like, I prefer that everybody just gets the same thing, and that people give out of their heart and out of what they have and what they don't. I'm not going to ask poor people, give your money because God will bless you. I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, I'd like to be more of a socialist type ministry where everybody gets included and everybody's there, and you don't have to give, I understand why people do that, because it really does help them make a living and things like that. So I'm not condemning them. And I watched my dad do that as like, oh, if you want to be a double diamond giver, you can do this, but it's so funny. Like, it's so easier for people to give to stuff like that. Like, people are so much faster. Like, I'm going to donate to their patrons so I can get a special phone call, or I can hear the unedited version, all the ahs and ums. But a church, I don't want to give to a church, like, oh, look at that greedy bastard asking for money. The church is asking for money again. Here we go again. But a patron's like, give to our patron. Everybody's like, all right, yeah, because I get something for it, This helps everybody get something for it. So, what do you think about that? Yeah, $3 a month. Yeah, Chris, you're right. Some are there. But you know what? You could also give us $3 a month, and that would help us continue our work, and go towards overhead costs and things like that. So nothing wrong with that. Like, my best buddy, that's what he does. And I think it's fantastic. I'm just saying the irony of like why some people feel more comfortable giving to a patron than to Revolution, to me, is always interesting. And you get a tax write-off from us, at least for now, because we have a 501c3. Anyway, there you go. Gotta maximize that donation. But yeah, I'm just being real and being honest and being transparent with you folks, because that's all we have is who we are. But thank you, everybody, for being a part of it. Thank you for being a community here. And like I said, maybe less is more with the church. And so you can just go out and live your life regularly and practice your own convictions, and then we can talk about it at another time. We can even talk about it online, like DMs or on Instagram or things like that, I'm glad to help folks. I'm love to give advice. It's not always the best, but I'm glad to do it. But I think this helps us all live a life in community with others around us, and these types of messages. So that's what we're going to continue to do. I believe in this work 120%. I believe in you folks and what we're going to do and how we better affect the world through this type of work. So love you all. Thank you so much for attending today, and I will see you all next week, hopefully less sick. All right, I'm gonna go take a little walk, and then I'm gonna have a nap. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.